When Micah speaks about humility, what he's speaking to is our relationship with God. And he uses this Hebrew word called sasana. And sana describes something that we do. It's a word that describes a physical lowering of ourselves before God. This Hebrew word, it should conjure up images of bowing before a king or kneeling as a sign of reverence or contrition in the presence of something greater, in the presence of God. This word is set into action and is best seen when we're kneeling at an altar rail or when we're bowing our head for prayer. But the psalmist reminds us that kneeling, that bowing, that sana, it's something that we also embody in worship. We should bow down. We should be humble in worship as well. This is what we read from the psalmist who writes, "Come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care." Worship, just like prayer, should allow us an opportunity to remember that God is God and that we are not, and we experience that when we humble ourselves, when we bow down, when we kneel. And that's the word that the ancient Greeks used to describe worship. Very similar to the Hebrew. The Greek word used for worship is proskuneo, and proskuneo literally means to bow down, to humble oneself, to rest on your knees. A service of worship where we gather together should force us all to our knees so that we recognize God's greatness, that God is the creator of all things seen and unseen, and that we are his creation. We are creatures, all of us just the same. Worship should lead us into an encounter with God that humbles us, that reminds us of who we are, that we aren't God, but that God is God. I sometimes think if the world could just remain in worship all the week long, how might the world be different? Except that God calls us to go and to do likewise. Which means we're called to leave worship, to leave this place of humble admonition, this place where we recognize that God is God and that we are not, but we are called by God to go out and then to treat each other the same way that God treats us, to see each other the same way that God sees us. And that's where things begin to break down. But that's the kind of humility that Jesus in the New Testament picks up. You see, Jesus, when he would speak about humility, when the New Testament writers would speak about humility, they weren't focused specifically on our relationship with God. They were focused on our relationship with each other. The New Testament, Jesus, they focused on how it is that we treat each other with humility, how it is that we carry forward in our daily life, loving one another, serving one another, blessing one another, seeing each other as equals, no one greater, no one lesser.